Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, our guest is Travis Chappell. Thanks for being on the show, Travis.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
Travis is a founder of World Class Media, a full-stack podcast production company specializing in helping busy entrepreneurs produce world-class products that pay. He's also the creator and host of both World Class, a podcast that reverse engineers what it takes to be world-class at what you do and build your network. A top 25 business podcast dedicated to helping entrepreneurs cultivate genuine relationships the right way. I know many of the listeners right now are either contemplating starting their own podcast or have been doing one for a little while, and you're wanting to grow your network in that way. And the guest today is the guy that can help you do just that and have an extremely professional brand and podcast and do it the right way. So, Travis, looking forward to this conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes, sir. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Tell the listeners a little more about who you are and about how you got into this podcasting stuff.
Sure. So how far back you want me to go?
Yeah. What caused you to start a podcast? Because I know like in our business, I mean, it's all about brand and getting our name out there, getting our brand out there, growing our network like it is, for many entrepreneurs. Right. And so, what caused you to put your, start a podcast and then, to grow the business to where you have now?
Yeah, sure. So I always kind of had the entrepreneurial itch growing up, and in college, that basically translated into learning how to sell. I was, running like a landscaping business or something like that when I was a senior in high school and a little bit into college. And really, I was just kind of moving from opportunity to opportunity, depending on how much money I could make. And the language that I spoke was definitely money. And so in college, I put the business aside because a buddy of mine started knocking on doors and doing door-to-door sales. And it intrigued me just because the paychecks that he was started to get were, on the higher side, especially for college. I mean, you don't have to make a ton of money to impress a college student. So I was just looking at that opportunity and decided asked my buddy if I could get an interview at that company. And then I just kind of took off with that. I think I had a natural inclination toward being, I don't know, maybe convincing in my arguments or salesy in some way. I don't know what it was, but I just kind of took to it and started getting promoted and started producing and it became one of the top producers in that company. And then eventually became a team leader, and I was running a team of door-to-door guys. And then that's basically what I did for the next few years was door-to-door sales, training, recruiting, managing, all that kind of stuff. And then I realized I didn't want that for the rest of my life. And I knew that if I didn't make a change soon, that I would be stuck doing that for the rest of my life. And so I, at that time, didn't know exactly what that was going to look like. I didn't know what I really wanted to do or what I could do or any of those things. And so I just kind of started consuming content because I didn't know what else to do. I just was like, started reading some books and listening to some audiobooks and started finally getting into podcasts for the first time ever. And, after a while of consuming content on those platforms, I was just like, man, this podcasting thing seems pretty cool. And I came across a couple of people who were only entrepreneurs in the fact that they had compiled a ton of content and given it to people. And that was essentially what their business was. So it was intriguing to me that they didn't have to necessarily be already a super successful business person in order to be able to have authority in the podcasting or content creation space. It's just like, if you get really good at that one skill, that in and of itself is valuable enough for people to pay you a lot of money to offer the information that you've been studying and learning for a long time. And so there's a couple of people that I look to, people like John Lee Dumas, who were just crushing it in that space and making a really, really good income with super high net profit margins. Like if you can still go to this day, go to ceofire.com, and you can look at John's income reports. He publishes them every single month, every single month for as long as his business has existed. So you can go on there and look at how he makes his revenue on his show, and what the exact breakdown is, and what his expenses are, and where it all goes to, and how much money he pockets in profit. And it was just insane to me that he could make a $250,000 in a month, and $220,000 could be profit. I was just like, I've never seen that type of business model before. And it was because he built an audience, and so he didn't have to pay for marketing. Essentially, like most companies have huge marketing budgets, he had zero marketing budget because he already has the entire audience that is like hanging on his every word and wanting to recommendations from him. And so that business model was super intriguing to me. And then also the fact that he had true freedom, in my opinion, which true freedom, I think, is a combination of all the different types of freedom. It's not just one freedom. It's not just time freedom. It's not just financial freedom. It's not just location freedom. It's kind of all three of those things wrapped up into one thing. You have time freedom, you have location freedom, you have financial freedom, which means that you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want, still make a lot of money. And obviously, that's kind of fantasizing it a little bit. There's obviously a lot of work that's still involved, but you can do your work from anywhere, and you can make a lot of money doing that work. And you can decide whether or not you're going to work today, or if you're just going to take the day off. Like all of those things he had in his control. It was autonomous, and he had that freedom. And so it was something that really attracted me to the industry. And so I was just like, you know what, I may as well try it out and see how it goes. And that's what brought me to the podcasting space.
Nice. So you loved the thought of that freedom, right? I mean,
Yep.
and you were attracted to that, especially your background in sales, and probably some ability there has helped in a big way. But, I know you're helping lots of people now with podcasting and building a good show and podcast. And, one thing you said though, when you were talking about you going through that process, just thinking about starting a show, and you said, you realize you don't have to be like a super authority in a space to have a podcast. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like, I get questions almost every week from people that schedule calls, and they're asking them everything. And maybe, they ask about, how to start a podcast. And one of their big things is, well, I'm not an expert in real estate, or I'm not an expert in whatever, and it seems like this big mental block, and it's so common. Yeah. And so, help us to break through that a little bit. I'm sure you get the same question, and you even said you realized that you didn't have to be this super authority. So what does that look like to you, and when is someone ready?
Yeah, it doesn't matter what level you're at. You can, like, if I wanted to start a show today about basket weaving, I could do it. I don't have to, I could never spend a second before researching it, and I could create a show and be successful at that show starting tomorrow, because all you really need is transparency and authenticity. Because the thing that hurts people is when they start creating content around a certain topic that they're not an expert in, but they let everybody think that they're an expert in it. And regardless of if they expressly say that or not, they just let everybody think that. And then that's when people start getting upset, because then if people assume you're the expert, and then they pay you for your advice, and then your advice doesn't work because you're not an expert, that's when you start pissing people off, right? So you just have to be totally genuine about it, and let people know, like, hey, this is a journey that we're going on together, which is essentially what I did. I wasn't an expert at networking. I'd never even been to a business event when I started my show. So it was just a topic that interested me, and something that I wanted to learn more about, something I wanted to master, something I wanted to ask questions about, something that was interesting. And so I started a show around that topic. And that's the best way, in my opinion, to break into an industry and to gain knowledge about a topic, is to start a show about it, because you're required to learn about it on a weekly, daily, bi-weekly, whatever your release schedule is, basis. And there's no level of consistent action that can match that, because you're literally having conversations with experts who are teaching you exactly how to do it. You're reading the books, the articles, listening to the podcasts and the audiobooks, and watching the YouTube videos, and consuming everything and anything about that topic, so that you can provide best information to your listeners. So it only helps you become more of an expert in that arena. But you don't have to be the expert. The only way that you have to be the expert is if you position yourself as the expert, because there's a lot of people that are just like that fake it till you make it people, who are just like, oh yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. And it's just like, okay, but you're not actually one. You just want people to perceive you as that way, instead of just being honest and upfront and real with people and saying like, hey, I'm not an entrepreneur. I currently work a 9 to 5, but I want to be an entrepreneur, and my show is about interviewing entrepreneurs because I want to learn from them, and you can learn from them too. And people can learn from the content.
Of course.
That's why I didn't release any solo content when I first started, because I wasn't the expert. I didn't think that there was much I could say at the time. I did a year's worth of 3 interviews a week and released over 150 interviews before I released any sort of solo content, because people weren't tuning in to listen to me at first. They were tuning in to listen to my guests because my guests were experts. And all I was doing was asking them questions that I was curious about, that I want to learn about. And so I figured if I want to learn about them, there's probably a lot of other people out there that want to learn about it as well. And I can just take them along the journey with me. So
Nice.
yeah, you don't need to be the expert at all. It just has to be something that you actually care about learning about, really.
Just has to be something you care about learning about. No, I'm glad you said that, because it's just this common misconception, I feel like, no doubt about it. And I can relate to you extremely well, with starting the syndication show as well. But so, give us just a few points on why people should have a podcast.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many reasons. Number one, I'll just kind of touch on the ones that I just mentioned, because I've already kind of explained the position on there. But knowledge would be one. The level of knowledge that you gain in an arena, like I said, there's no better accountability tool than having a podcast. And when it comes to learning about a certain topic, because there's no way that I would have read all the books that I've read on networking and communication had I not had a show that's all about networking and communication. Just no way. I just feel like almost a moral obligation to bring the best quality content to my audience that I possibly can, which requires me to constantly be reading and consuming material around the topic that I talk about. So that's one thing. Your knowledge base and your craft, or the thing that you're talking about, will soar through the roof, really. Number 2 would be your network. And this is probably the most important one and most beneficial one, because most people don't ever take on purpose time to network with the best people in their industry and get to know the best practices in their industry. And it's a huge mistake. And a lot of people view it as since it's an activity that doesn't have a direct return on investment for your time, it's hard to put time into it, because having a conversation with somebody could easily be perceived as a waste of time rather than a profitable activity for the day. If you're somebody that's super structured, and if let's say you're a real estate agent, and you know that if you call X amount of number of people every single day, that you're going to get X amount of deals from it, and you're going to close X amount of escrows from it and make X amount of commission, and you find yourself on the phone for 2 hours talking to a colleague that has nothing to do with earning business that day, or it's not really an income producing activity, it's really easy to put that on the back burner and deprioritize it as something that's not worth your time, because you don't see the immediate ROI like you do on sales calls or lead generation or prospecting or some of those other, activities. So sometimes it's difficult to wrap your mind around, but that's why a podcast allows you to make sure that you're taking that time on a weekly basis to connect with people who are in that same space, to answer questions, to have conversations, to talk about concepts and discuss opportunities and all those different things that you do within your own industry. It keeps you accountable to constantly doing that on a regular basis with the people in your industry that you should be building relationships with. And not to mention, and that's just talking about the people who are accessible. The people who are inaccessible in your industry, the ones that are doing it at the highest level, have way more demands on their time, and so many more people trying to get in touch with them. And so if you just reach out to them just for the sake of reaching out to them and ask them to jump on a call, they're probably going to say no. And I had a lot of people tell me no when I asked for a call when I started my show, because I thought that was an easier ask. I was like, oh yeah, 2-minute phone call. Like they'll say yes to that before they say yes to a podcast interview. And I was dead wrong. I was totally wrong. That logic did not track. What I found was the total opposite. People would say no to a 3-minute phone call and then said yes to a 35-minute podcast interview that I could share with the entire world. So your network is, if nothing else ever came show and only the relationships and the opportunities in the network that I have now came from my show, it'd be worth every dollar I've ever put into it and every minute I've ever spent on it. It's 100% worth it, just from the network of people that you build up around you, especially if you're like pioneering into a new space that you've never been in before in your life, because you're starting from scratch, and this just requires you to reach out and get to know more people in that space. So knowledge, network, revenue, customer relationships, trust with your clients. There's so many other reasons, but knowledge and network would be the 2 that I put at the top, because most people don't talk about those. They only talk about revenue. They only talk about building an audience. They only talk about super fans. They don't ever mention the fact that like these other abstract concepts are happening as a direct result of podcasting, and then nobody ever talks about it. So I like to spend a good amount of time on those other things because they're not as trackable, but they definitely happen.
Yeah. Sound like your mic may have just switched, just so you know. But I could not agree with you more. I mean, I'm a prime example of pretty much everything you just said. And I loved how you talked about the accountability to learn. And I mean, because if you're going to be consistent and you're going to keep your podcast going, you're going to be learning continuously. I love that. And you get to ask all the experts the questions that you have. And so couldn't agree more. Yeah, I'd love to dive into just maybe a few key things that either or you see are best practices for launching a quality show, and maybe a couple of things you see, where people mess up during a launch as well. I know that's a common question that I get, and I wish so much that I had known when I started my show. I knew then what I know now about a good launch, but would love to have your thoughts.
Yeah, people mess up because they prioritize the wrong things. And I think one of those things is equipment. Equipment is something that people spend way too much time thinking about. They just get so bogged down with that stuff, because if you're not a techie, then you have to learn about all these things that you have no business learning about and that you don't need to learn about, really. So if that's what's holding you back, don't even worry about equipment. Just like, the content is going to be the most important thing. Like this microphone that I'm using looks like the same one that you're using, Whitney, is an ATR 2100 from Audio-Technica. It costs $63 on Amazon. This $2 pop filter is on top of the microphone, and this newer boom arm is like $11 on Amazon.
That's exactly what I've got.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. So this setup you can get for like $85 on Amazon, and this is what I used for really until like this past month. I finally upgraded my setup last month to like a $2,500 setup, but I mean that took me 2.5 years to get to, and hundreds of thousands of dollars generated off of just the show. So like I justified the expense at that point, and I produce podcasts for a living. So I wanted to be more congruent. Like if I were in a business like yours, Whitney, and I was like doing real estate, I wouldn't have even upgraded my equipment recently anyway. The only reason I did it is just because since I'm producing podcasts, I think I should have the like be on the up and up with that stuff. So but that being said, like this literally is a USB microphone. It plugs directly into my computer, and I don't need an audio mixer or any of those other crazy things. Like I use GarageBand for free on my MacBook. For interviews, I use Zoom. It's $9.99 a month to use Zoom. And then I have a media host that's like $20 a month, and that's it. Like don't worry about any, if that's the thing holding you back, then the wrong thing is holding you back. So focusing on equipment is a big mistake that I see a lot of people make. They'll go out and they'll buy that $3,000 setup without even like knowing what they're going to talk about yet. And it's like, well, that was just a waste of money. You don't need to do that. So that's one thing for sure. Another thing would be not spending enough time focusing on messaging toward your ideal listener or avatar, and just kind of creating content. And like the problem is people duplicate success after success is already had, meaning that they'll look at someone like Joe Rogan and they'll be like, well, Joe Rogan just gets together with his friends and smokes weed and drinks beer and like has a conversation, and he gets $100 million a month. So I'm just going to do that. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't see 1,500 episodes ago and 12 years ago when Joe Rogan started his show, when there were like no podcast existing at that point. And like, you didn't see the fact that like, he was the first to that niche. He was the first to that space. You can't duplicate his success now because it's a totally different landscape. Same with someone like John Lee Dumas. The reason why he was so successful is because he started a daily entrepreneurial interview show that was 7 days a week interviewing entrepreneurs. Generic entrepreneurship, just in the entrepreneurship category. And he blew up and took off and exploded because that was a blue ocean at the time. It's no longer a blue ocean. So you can't just jump into that space and duplicate what the successful people have done like right now, because it's a totally different landscape. So you have to find your niche, you have to find your ideal avatar, you have to find your blue ocean, and you have to find what the thing that you can talk about that's going to resonate with a certain audience of people. If you're talking to everybody, you're talking to nobody. So you can't just like turn on a mic. I mean, look, you can, just don't expect people to show up and listen to it. You know what I mean? Like you can do whatever you want. Like I'm not here to be like the police of podcasting, but I'm saying if you want results and you want to make money from it, that's different. Like if you want to just have a hobby show where you and your buddies talk about Star Trek and drink beer together every Monday night. You know what? Great. That's an awesome social activity. And it's cool that you can produce something fun out of that. Great. Do your thing, but don't expect to just like make a ton of money off of it and retire tomorrow. So that's another thing is people don't focus enough time on their messaging and what their exact audience is that they're talking to. So they get frustrated when there's no audience growth and there's no ability to make money on their show after doing it for a year or two. So they just stop doing it. So that's another thing. Another thing would be people don't take the launch process seriously. And again, it all depends on the goals that you have for your show. But if you want a successful show and you want it to go on for a long time and you want to hit the top charts and you want those things, you have to have a solid launch plan. You have to have a launch strategy. iTunes treats your show differently within the first 8 weeks of launch. So you have to take advantage of that time period before you treat it like every other show. And you gotta create multiple episodes and weeks of content before you hit the launch button so that you don't get bogged down every single week when you're like, oh man, it's Thursday, tomorrow is Friday, I guess I better release an episode. You can't have that type of mentality about it, because then that's when you just start skipping episodes, and then you start, taking a dip in your quality of your episodes. And like, if without quality, consistent content, you have nothing. Quality, consistent content, you have nothing. So you have to make sure that you are staying consistent and putting out quality content. And the only real way to ensure that happens is to stay ahead of your release schedule by a few weeks. So you have to batch that content and release. So when you launch, you have to have a 2-month bank of episodes when you launch, so that you can prevent yourself from running into those situations where you're tempted to either take a dip in quality or not release consistently because you're not booked 3 or 4 weeks out. So there's a few things right off the top of my head that will definitely
that's awesome. That's awesome. I love how you talked about, and I've heard it from numerous people, but it still seems so hard to get in our heads sometimes. If you try to talk to everybody, you talk to no one. And maybe you could take 10 seconds or 20 and just stress the importance of just niching down.
Yeah, so I like the phraseology of blue ocean strategy a lot better than like niching down, just because niching down gives this idea of like, if like you got to go like 6 layers deep to be able to find, you got to talk to dentists in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who make less than 200, you know what I'm saying? Like that's not the idea that I want to give off by doing that. That's why I like the blue ocean thing, because like you have to go where your blue ocean is, meaning that like, and the whole analogy has to do with like sharks in the ocean. And if there's something like a seal just died in the ocean and it's not bleeding, it's just dead, then it's a blue ocean, right? But a shark comes and takes the first bite, the ocean starts getting a little bit red, right? And then when that red happens, all the other sharks smell the blood and they start swimming over to the same seal and they all start feeding on the same seal. And all of a sudden the ocean is super, super red. So that's the idea of the blue ocean. You have to find your blue ocean. So like I said, Joe Rogan doesn't have a niche. He talks about whatever he wants to talk about. He talks to whoever he wants to talk about, or he talks to whoever he wants to talk to. They, like I said, smoke weed, they drink, they do whatever they want. But when he started his show, that was blue ocean. There was no other podcasters that were doing that. Like there just wasn't. And then you bring in the fact that he was able to bring in interesting people because he has a unique network of people around him, and he filled that niche really, really quickly. He filled that blue ocean. So when he took that first bite and people started realizing like, oh, there's something here, that a lot of people started going around the same area, and that ocean became very, very, very red. So someone like John Lee Dumas comes along and he's like, I can't just talk about nothing. I got to talk about something specifically. Well, what's something specific I can talk about? Entrepreneurship, business. Great. Cool. I'll do that. So he jumps in and he starts creating daily content around entrepreneurship. And then he takes that first bite, and then a bunch of people swarm it because he starts making money and he starts getting a lot of downloads. So a bunch of people swarm it and they come in, and now all that ocean's totally red. You can't just start an entrepreneurial interview show anymore. Like there has to be something beyond that, because if you're doing it that way, you're just jumping into a red ocean. And so when I started my show, it ended up being networking. Networking was the topic that I ended up choosing because that allowed me to niche down further from an entrepreneurship category to networking specifically, and not even just with entrepreneurs. Like I have that conversation with more than just entrepreneurs. It's all about how to build relationships and connections the right way. So that was a blue ocean at the time. Now some other people are jumping on board of that one, and you know what I mean? Like that's an ocean that's starting to become more red. So that's why I say I like the phraseology blue ocean better, because It's not really about like niching down 7 layers. It's just about finding a space where it's not completely oversaturated and there's not, 100 other people that are already operating in and playing in that space. So it just is a much easier way for you to stand out and find your people.
What do you say though about, that person that's just trying to build the credibility though? Let's say obviously there's tons of real estate podcasts, and I hear all the time, well, Whitney, there's so many real estate podcasts. There's no way I could stand out. Should they still start some kind of real estate podcast?
Yeah, definitely. There's always room for the best is something Tom Bilyeu says. Something he told me when I interviewed him on my show was there's always room for the best. He jumped into a saturated space. You know what I mean? So it's not like you can't make those things happen. Like Dax Shepard jumped in and made the whole conversational podcast thing work after Joe Rogan did it, but he was Dax Shepard. So he brings on freaking A-list celebrities like Edward Norton to talk about a movie he just directed. Of course people are going to listen to it. Like, was that ocean super red? Yeah, but he's the best when it comes to his network and the people that he can have conversations with. So he's going to shoot up to the top anyway. There's always room for the best. So if you can come in and start a real estate podcast and just do it better than 90% of the other people do it, then you're creating almost your own blue ocean in a red ocean because you're just better at it. And if you create really, really quality stuff, people are going to want to listen to it and pay attention to it.
What about, and we're about out of time, unfortunately, or maybe we can have you back sometime and us further the conversation, but what about just the expense that the listeners should expect when starting a show? It's totally dependent, man. Like that could range from so many different things because you can do it for super cheap. Like I said, this setup right here is $83. Yeah, or like maybe just to produce the show. Maybe not equipment, but like just to actually produce it. Yeah, like a monthly basis, you're saying? Sure. If they're doing a weekly show on a monthly basis, what should they expect? I know it would vary a lot, but yeah, sure. And the reason I say it varies is because like you can do all this yourself. Like you can, you have free software like GarageBand, you get a $20 media host, and you can edit and mix your own shows, and you can produce the show every month for $20, like literally just the cost of your media host, and that's it. Or you could hire somebody like me and we do done for you podcasts where like you're running a successful business. We work with real estate syndicator. Like my last syndication client raised $7 million for an apartment building that he was putting together. And $1.5 million of the $7 million came directly from his podcast that we helped him create. So we do that and we charge a good amount for it because we do all the strategy and stuff like that. And we build all the assets, all the audio assets, the intros, the outros, the voiceover work, the music, the media host, the show notes. Like we do everything for you, right? So that ranges more like, depending on how many episodes you're doing, $15,000 to $20,000 for us to do something like that. And then on a monthly basis, anywhere from $75 to $125 an episode that you're going to be paying for production. So if you're doing one a week, you might be $300, $400, $500 a month in there to produce the show on a monthly basis, where all you have to do is worry about creating content. So, that's why I say there's a huge range in there because it really just depends on what your goals are. If your goals are just to like get some content out, do it for as cheap as possible and start getting content out. If your goal is to create a successful show and start making money as soon as possible and use it as like a, private capital raising show, then you might want to hire somebody like me that actually knows what we're doing so that you don't have to take a year and a half to learn all the things about podcasting. Like I can just tell you all of them and do most of it for you. So, I can cut the learning curve completely for those of you where it makes sense to do that. So like if you're a mom and pop shop that, you just want to start like I was saying before, you want to start a podcast with your buddies that talks about Star Trek, you probably shouldn't hire me and you should probably do it for super cheap and because it's just going to be a fun project. But if you want to make money off of it and it's going to be a business development tool for you and you have a clear path to monetization, then hire somebody like me so we can set you up better for strategy, cut the learning curve by a 10th or, by 90%, and that way you don't have to worry about content or the only thing you have to worry about is content. You don't have to worry about equipment. You don't have to worry about software or recording or show notes or media hosts or tagging or any of the other stuff that goes into it because we're going to take care of that for you. So, the expense can be really whatever you want it to be. So the important thing is just to start something and whatever, like if you don't want to figure it out, hire somebody like me. If you do want to figure it out, you can do it for really, really cheap. Travis, what's the one thing that's contributed to your success?
I mean, this is going to sound cliche just because my show is called Build Your Network, but easily my network, easily the networking that I do. Like, there's no way that I would have seen as much success as blessed to see as early on as I've seen it if I didn't make a clear effort to continuously increase the quality of the guests that I was bringing on the show to more well-known and well-liked individuals, because that just, the law of association reigns true. You know, if you associate with a bunch of people that are super high level, then everybody's going to pursue to be on a same or similar level to all those people, regardless of if they've ever met you or not. You know, so that's why I spent so much of my time networking and trying to find those better and better guests, because I wanted to be known as somebody that associated with those types of people. And that's easily the number one thing that's helped me see some success in the least.
And how do you like to give back?
I like to give back through all of the content I make. Like, it's always awesome for hear when people's lives have changed or certain aspects of their business has changed or things like that, like clear, real results that I've gotten from totally free things that I've put out, like a podcast episode or a free course or a download or something like that, where I just put out something totally for free. I don't charge anything for it. And they actually take that free piece of content, apply what I'm talking about, and see what happen. That's always something that's super cool.
Nice. Travis, grateful for your time today and just going through some of the launch process and why the listeners should really be thinking about starting a show and some of the expenses to think about or equipment and getting past some of those mental blocks that I know I hear every week from people. But tell them how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you in case they need help.
Yes, sir. So if you're interested in having me and my team create a podcast for you, can just go to travischappell.com/makemypodcast. Chappell is Chappell. So travischappell.com/makemypodcast. There's a quick application, and then we'll jump on a phone call to see if we should build that out for you, because there's a very specific type of person we look for. Honestly, though, probably the majority of your audience will qualify for that, because we like working with real estate investors. We like working with people that have higher ticket offers and can justify the expense of working with us very, very easily. So, because like I said, we're not the cheapest people around, but we do provide really quality work. So people that have, like this other syndicator we worked with that raised $1.5 million, like obviously was worth paying me 15, 20 grand to create the show for him, because there was an immediate return for him. So a lot of your audience probably would be qualified, but we do the application because not every business makes sense for us to do that for. If you're like selling $12 e-com products, that's not necessarily our ideal client. So we only work with people who we genuinely think are going to be able to take advantage of the service that we provide in the best possible way and see a relatively immediate ROI on what they spend with us. So head over there if that's something interesting to you, and we can have a conversation about that. Anything else, just travischappell.com. You can find all my social links on there, both of my podcasts, my YouTube channel, all that kind of stuff over at travischappell.com.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.